Zoom. It says that we are live on Facebook. So hopefully we are also actually live on Facebook. So hi everybody, welcome to another bilateral Tuesday, as we call them in the Civil Society Development Foundation. We are doing these live meetings with people from, especially from Iceland and Norway, for that organizations in Romania that are interested in the Active Citizens Fund Romania, that want to apply with projects and want to develop projects with partners from the donor countries. They get a more in-depth, let's say, feeling about topics that are important for the donor states. And today I'm really pleased to have Margrét here with us from the Icelandic Human Rights Center. Margrét, who has been really helpful for us also in the previous program. They are the contact point of the Financial Mechanism Office to Iceland and to organizations in Iceland. And I'm really happy to have you, Margrét, in this conversation
Thank
today.
you. I'm really happy to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about you and the Icelandic Human Rights Center, so that people understand why we're having this conversation with you?
Well, starting with me, I'm a lawyer, and for many years I've been involved in all sorts of human rights activities, you might say. So I have been involved with the women's movement, well, it seems forever, since 1980 something. Actually, I was 15 when I held or gave my first presentation at a seminar on women's rights. So I'm really old at this, but the women's movement, I became involved in the 1980s. I was working for the Data Protection Authority, which of course is also upholding human rights. And then I started working for the Intercultural Center, which was a counseling and information center for immigrants. And there I was a legal advisor to immigrants. So I got a very clear picture of the situation of immigrants in Iceland. And then in 2010, I started working for the Icelandic Human Rights Center. And to tell you a bit about the center, it was established in 1994 and actually originally by 9 organizations. And it was established because the United Nations requires every member state to have a national human rights institution, and we did not have such in Iceland. So those organizations established the Icelandic Human Rights Center, and our role ever since then has been to operate according to the UN Paris Principles on national human rights institutions, and gradually we have had more affiliates. So now we count 15, and they include Amnesty International, of course, the Icelandic division, Save the Children Iceland, the Association of Disabled, the Women's Rights Association, the LGBTI organization, the Mental Health Alliance, the Universities of Reykjavik and Akureyri, and the Humanist Ethical Society. So we have very many and varied affiliates to our center. And we also work in close cooperation with other NGOs in Iceland, with organizations which are then aimed at upholding human rights, usually of specific groups, such as disabled people, immigrants, children, and so on. And we also work in close cooperation, actually, with municipal bodies, because many of the municipal institutions actually have the role of basically maintaining people's rights, and they of course must also take care that they that everyone gets equal treatment and so on. So we are actually also often working in close cooperation with those institutions and organizations. And we are looked to by the Icelandic government basically as a, substitute for a national institution until until it will be established according to the UN requirements. So we have a cooperation agreement with the Ministry of Justice, and we have also a service agreement with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and that one is for a national contact point for CSOs from beneficiary countries to the EEA grants, so that we can facilitate partnerships, I mean. And then we also have a service agreement with the Ministry of Social Affairs, and that one is for legal counseling and advice for immigrants. And our main role, you might say, our main task is to promote human rights, and then through education, through lobbying, and so on. We write additional reports to UN bodies and Council of Europe bodies. The latest was to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. We were actually introducing it only this month. So we're kept pretty busy because we're only 2 people working there. So
of course.
So we have plenty to do all the time.
Because you were, I don't know if people who are watching us heard how many times you said human rights right now. And this is actually one of the key things that especially in the program, when we think about Iceland and we think about organizations in Iceland, we are connecting it directly to human rights. And I think that's a very, very important part of the civil society in Iceland. But how did this came to that? I mean, how was the movement of civil society, erected in Iceland? Where did it start from? When did it start? How did it start?
Actually, we have a long-standing tradition of NGOs or CSOs here, and if we go way back, many societies were actually established, such as literary societies and poets societies, so it was more for the arts. But then in the 19th century, the women's organizations actually started forming. So it was the women in rural areas, and also here in Reykjavik, they started forming societies to start with, basically for the assistance of those worse off, for poor families and so on, and then gradually to assist with other areas of society. For example, there is one organization who actually managed to have a children's hospital built. So formal establishment of the women's societies was in the early 1900s, and then the Icelandic Women's Rights Association was established in 1907, and we managed to have votes for women in 1915. So we have a long-standing tradition of, you might say, rights-based approach organizations. Other groups, you might say, followed suit. So organizations of disabled people were established, and in 1961 the Association of Disabled in Iceland was established. So it's a large umbrella organization counting, I think, around 50 affiliates, people with various kinds of disabilities. And we also have the Association of People with Intellectual Disabilities and the Mental Health Alliance. They're a bit younger organizations, but they are really strong. The LGBTI organization was established here in 1978, and they managed, well, they are really, I would say their approach was really effective. They managed to, well, change the public opinion. Of course, some people were not really prejudiced against, well, queer people, but others were, and maybe the what society needed was education. So they did this through peer education. So I would say that they were really successful in their work. And you know, just to name a few organizations. Immigrant organizations, of course, are really young here because we had a really homogeneous society. We had, well, after the wars, the Second World War, we had a few German women who moved to Iceland. They came here to work in farms and so on. And then in 1956, we accepted a group of Hungarians to the country after the revolution in Hungary. And then we had a few, well, that was at the end of the 1970s. We had two groups of Vietnamese people come here. And of course, people went to other countries to educate themselves, and they met someone there and got married, and those people moved here. But still, we had very few people of foreign origin in this country until basically the well, 1990s. We started to see people move here from Asia, mostly women marrying Icelandic men. And then people started coming from Poland to work here in fish factories and other places. And now we have actually a very large population of immigrants. They count around 50,000 people, which is, I think, around 15% of the whole nation.
Yeah.
And the largest group by far is from Poland. I think we have up to 20,000 people from Poland. And they have basically, you might say, integrated very well into Icelandic society. But just coming back to the Human Rights Center, we have actually, well, we are kept pretty busy because we have to stay on top of the situation of every group. So we have organizations working for disabled, we have immigrant organizations and so on. We need to know what the situation is with every group so we can point out to the government that this is becoming a problem, and we need to mend this situation and so on. So yeah, and this is also why our center is such a well, an ideal contact point, because we actually have this strong connection to so many organizations working here. And we have, well, hundreds, even thousands of NGOs and CSOs here. But if we take those working for, well, human rights or democracy, the rights of specific groups of society, and also an environmental protection and so on, we probably are talking about around, well, maybe 400 or 500 organizations And of course, some of them are really small. And most NGOs here, by international standards, are small because they, well, the members to have, like the Women's Rights Association has, I think, or last I know, they had about 2,500 members, but that's really large for Iceland.
Yeah, for
Only,
sure.
we're only at 360,000 people in all.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would say that most people are actually really active. They take part in, well, more than one NGOs. I myself am a member of a few organizations, for example.
Because like I don't know if people watching us actually know the history of the women's rights movement in Iceland, and I'm actually quite curious to see, because you know for sure the women's rights movement, you have been part of it since a long time. Like,
not
can
since 1907, but
yeah,
still quite a long time.
yes, it is. But you also know the history of it. I'm quite. I could be quite. It could be quite interesting for people to understand how the movement, the women's rights movement in Iceland, actually developed, so that they can draw some inspiration in how we can, you know, address it also here.
Yeah, akkurat. Well, if we start with the Women's Rights Association, it was actually established by a woman called Bríet, and she was the wife of an editor of a very popular magazine, and they wrote articles on women's rights. They were both very progressive thinking people. And she established the Women's Rights Association and a few other women with her in 1907, and they immediately started trying to affect the parliament. And those women were actually all of a high social standing. So some of them were married to parliamentarians or well, people high up in the government and so on. And they managed to push through the bill for votes for women or women's suffrage in 1915. And they continued with all sorts of other, I forgot to mention also that they managed also to pass a bill that was earlier for the University of Iceland to be of equal access to women and men. And also that women should also be eligible for higher positions like government positions and so on. Unfortunately, even if this law was in place, it took a long time before women actually were considered for these positions. Then they they also started the it's called the Mother's Aid. It was an organization to help poor women, single mothers with children. It was quite common here that, well, wives lost their husbands to the sea because, of course, the fisheries were our main area or industry. So there were many, single mothers with children who really needed help. So they established the Mother's Aid. They also brought about the primary schools or kindergartens so that women could work. And it's been quite a long time here that maybe forever that single mothers were not considered to be anything exceptional here. So it was quite common that children were raised only by their mothers due to either the fathers then having died at sea, or even the women. It was also common that that women had who were working at farms. They maybe had a child by the farmer, but then the farmer was already married, so they had to live with their child and so on. So they were basically well, crucial in the establishment of kindergartens. So also the other women's organizations I was telling you about, the the Association of Icelandic Women, and they were also in their part of the country. They were actually assisting and trying to help those in need and so on. So this is basic. This is the basis, and through various measures, of course, the situation of women got better gradually throughout the 20th century, and of course they were also played a large part in women getting the same wages for the same jobs. So before, women were maybe doing the same job as a man, but they were paying only 1/3, were being paid only 1/3 of what he got. But this also changed gradually, even if we still have a wage gap. Funnily enough, we still have a wage gap in Iceland, which is counted to be around 15%, even if Iceland has been now, I think, for 11 or 12 consecutive years on the top of the gender gap index. We still have to correct this. Now then, in the 1970s, more radical women's groups arose, such as the Red Stocking movement, and they actually did not work that much with other more established organizations, such as the Women's Rights Association. But then in 1980, we started the Women's List, which was a political party which managed to get in the first election that they were 4 women, I think, were elected to the parliament. And this movement actually, basically along with other women's organizations, they established the women's shelter, the women's counseling, which I've been actually working as a volunteer for the women's counseling since 1990, and that's free legal and social advice for women. And then Steinarsdóttir, which is a center for an education and information center on sexual violence and for victims of sexual violence. Steinarsdóttir was established in 1990, and even if cooperation between various women's organizations had actually been present, it hadn't really been that extensive. But around 1990, I would say we started working together, or being more focused in working together. And since then, we have reached incredible results. But even having said that, we organized in cooperation the women's strike in 1975. So on October 24th, 1975, all women just left their work and went downtown demanding equal pay for equal jobs and so on, and ending of gender-based violence. And this again was repeated in 1985 and then in 1995. And then we did it again in 2005 and in 2010 and again in 2015. So we actually intend now to have this every 5 years instead of every 10 years. But this strong back-to-back cooperation of women's organizations, some more radical than others, some working for victims of sexual violence, victims of gender-based violence, and so on. Others in the labor market, but still all coming together to work for a common goal, which is actually promoting women's rights. And not as many people say women want more power than men. They want to be control men, to be superior. That's not the case at all. We just want equal status. So that no one ever thinks, when you consider a man or a woman, no one ever thinks, well, it's better, of course, to have a man in this job. They might think it's better to have a man with, or a person with this education in this job, but not people with the same education, same qualifications, that a man should be better suited. Well, that's one thing. Also, of course, gender-based violence is a problem here as everywhere else, I would think.
Yeah.
So we still have quite a way to go, even if, and we are not by any means are we stopping our our activities. We will be carrying on.
Yeah. It is very interesting that, like, because based on the movement, I mean, for sure, this is the specific timeline, let's say, of the women's rights movement. But of course, it kind of, you know, underlines together with the whole development of the civil society in Iceland, because I think without the women's rights movement in Iceland, you know, the civil society would have looked different for sure.
Absolutely. And often there were women actually instigating other rights as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for example, disabled people and so on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting to see this, like, you know, the first part of the movement when, but like, I think that the general idea is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I always thought about this, like, basically the key essential, I don't know how to say, element to the movement, to the women's rights movement, was to take over.
Oh.
You know, because we were taking over kindergarten and humanitarian aid in the old times. We were taking over services and political implication, and now we're taking over working together. Something like, also like taking over everything of Iceland in 1975, when you know, everybody was left out basically because of the movement. And I think this is an interesting element of the movement, to take over, basically. Would you say that happened?
Well, yes, we saw the need in so many areas, and now something that was basically brought about by the women's movement has now become the responsibility of, for example, the municipality or the government, such as the kindergartens and so on. But so many of these things actually, and like equal pay and so on, it maybe would not even have happened if it hadn't been for the women's movement. So that's right. We basically took over. We just did not stop until this was a reality. And then, of course, we had it. It was already established, and it's so often that you need basically to open people's eyes to the situation, that they realize that this is how things should be. So then it was accepted by, well, those in power, those in authority, that this is something that needs to be established and maintained.
Yeah, tackled. Yeah, for sure, for sure. How would you say, like, because this is like the overview of the things, and moving on to the present more, let's say, you were saying that especially for the women's movement, for example, this is the new, like, from since the 1990s, like, they started to work together. So is this still happening? I mean, was this developed further especially for the women's rights movement?
Yeah. Well, yes. Always if we plan something big, we all come together. And also if we have, let's say, there are bills before Parliament and so on that concern the rights of women, then we consult. We consult each other, and then we send our comments. Even if we send them individually, we just usually we're all on the same page. So that I think that actually we present a united front to, let's say, to the government or to the authority. Yeah.
And like you were also saying that this is something that I appreciated and admired a lot for Icelandic organizations. Even though you are 14 years in a row on the top 3 worldwide gender pay gap in the world, you still say that no, okay, yes, we are there, but we still need to work on things. So you always have this approach that okay, not everything is perfect, we're not a perfect country for sure, and we still need to work on things. And I super appreciate that on one hand. And I understand the idea from like the, let's say, the issue with the equal pay for example, and gender-based violence and domestic violence. But other than that, would you say there are some other issues, let's call them, in the Icelandic civil society that organizations are tackling nowadays?
Yeah, definitely. For example, disabled people, we still need or have a long way to go to ensure that they can live their life to the fullest, and society actually, we did ratify the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People. It's still not, it is not been implemented into Icelandic law, and some Icelandic laws need to be amended so that they meet with the requirements of the convention, and also its ideology. And another thing, actually a great task I think that we have before us is to educate all of society, and especially those working with and for disabled people, on the ideology of the convention. So it's not as before, maybe many people saw this as a well, more a health issue or than welfare issue. We are actually talking about human rights.
Yeah.
And people should be and also, well, this thought that it is only society that disables you, because you ought to be able to live your life to the fullest, and society must accommodate you so that you can. And this is something I see this as a rather large task that we have ahead of us, because even if many people actually are in agreement and so on, still the mindset of many needs to be changed. They need to be helped with seeing things in a different perspective. So that's one challenge that we're facing. And also just more concrete, that disabled people enjoy, well, they have actually different access to services depending on where they live in the country. So many people, let's say parents with disabled children, have had to move from their homes to other parts of the country so that the child can get the service that they need. So this is also something that we need to tackle. And then we have, of course, the situation of immigrants. Of course, due to COVID, and Iceland was so reliant on tourism, then so many have lost their jobs now. People working in hotels and restaurants and so on, and a large number of them are immigrants. And now we have, I think the unemployment rate is about 8%, but it's 30 something among immigrants. So that's another very different, difficult situation. And also we see that people are having a hard time finding jobs befitting their education. So we often have highly educated people here, which would of course benefit society greatly, but they do not get a job befitting their education. They have to, well, do cleaning jobs or something like that. So this is another thing that we have to change, and we have a large dropout rate of children of immigrant background from well, grammar school, for example. So there are many things that we really need to look into.
But having these, let's say, these three topics, which are, I understand, they are on the agenda, let's say, in Iceland. I was curious, how is the relationship of the civil society organizations of NGOs with the public authorities? Is local and or national? It doesn't matter the level, but how so that people can better understand also this relationship with the public authority.
Yeah, akkurat. So many NGOs in Iceland are government funded, but many also get funds through membership fees and grants, and having support from various people, like monthly support and so on. But even those who get all their money from the government, like the Icelandic Human Rights Center, we have those three agreements or with the three ministries, as I was saying before, and they actually are the bulk of our income, especially the cooperation agreement with the Ministry of Justice, which we get our largest funding from the ministry. But we actually are still free to criticize the government, and we do not hesitate to do so. So even if even organizations who are very critical of the government, they do not really need to fear any repercussions. And also the like our center, we are very often called upon to sit on committees established by various ministries for when it comes to rights. Like I was recently in a committee which was working on changing the law on equal rights and equal status of women and men. And I was also a member of a committee which was revising the law on I'm not sure how to, on sexual autonomy. Yeah, so it's a law that we recently established here. Also a committee which was well, I'm a member of a specialist committee, for example, on human trafficking, because through my work as a legal advisor to immigrants, I have met many people who I have actually defined as victims of trafficking. And I see the trends and how it appears in Iceland through, for example, either the sex industry or then all sorts of labor market trafficking. So yeah, so we are, I would say that we are listened to, definitely. Some organizations would disagree with me, but at least this is my experience. So I have to, of course, speak from my experience.
Of course. Because you were mentioning some organizations, in other organizations, I was also very because you were also saying that, especially like for the women's rights movement since the 1990s, where they started to work together. You were saying at the beginning all the 15 affiliates that the Icelandic Human Rights Center has, and I was, because I think there is a lot of connection between the Icelandic organizations from the civil society sector perspective. Of course, it's a small country. It's the number of organizations is of course also small. So you have the possibility, like physical possibility, to get connected. But how did this start to like, because you are more or less working on a network-based approach, let's say. And how do you know how this was created in Iceland, this network approach of working for the civil society?
I think actually it's mostly due to what you were saying, that we're so small. So
yeah,
everyone just knew this one who was working for this organization. And to start with, if I take again the women's the women's movement as an example, some, let's say, women in the Women's Rights Association, they were a bit, hesitant towards the red stockings because they were so radical. And then later the Icelandic Feminist Society was established, and then again they thought the Women's Rights Association was so conservative. But of course, but still we had connections. There were of course neighbors who belonged to various organizations and so on, and we started just to realize that we are working for the same goal. And even if some are more radical than others, and still we are working for the same goal. And it is actually the same with the Human Rights Center, with our 15 affiliates. Often, of course, the rights can actually clash, you might say.
Yes.
So
yes.
We're talking about maybe women's rights, and then we also have, for example, the Church Aid and the Icelandic Lutheran Church are a member of our the center as well. So we might see, for example, if we might see a clash with religion and children's rights, such as the which actually isn't that relevant here, but still we have religious organizations here which circumcise young boys. And there was a bill for Parliament actually to prohibit circumcision of boys except for necessary medical purposes. And then, of course, there was this clash of the rights of the child to not to have to undergo unnecessary medical procedure, and then on the other hand, the rights of the parents who belong to this particular religion. So even if often we are not in agreement, still we manage to keep, you might say, keep our eye on the ball, to work for the goal towards a better society and better respect of human rights and more equality between all groups.
Yeah. And I think that's very important, and it's something that for sure in the previous NGO program, and for sure also in this program, when organizations will partner with organizations from Romania will partner with organizations from Iceland, it's very important to see your approach on human rights and rights protection. Basically, it's not like I'm not working from the perspective of because this is also something that we talked about last year at the Me Too conference in Reykjavik. Remember, it's not providing services, it's protecting rights. Basically,
absolutely.
that's the approach.
That's the approach.
Yeah,
because it is a human right. Everyone is entitled to live their life with human dignity and to the fullest, basically, to the fullest of their potential. So those who, for example, cannot work and need to rely on others for sustenance, then it's not enough just to provide them with enough to eat and a roof over their head. They must also be able to enjoy social and cultural rights and so on. And if they want to educate themselves or take courses and so on, they ought to be able to do that. We still have a long way to go there, actually, mentioning that, because the disability pension here, for example, is too low. It's far too low, and it really needs to be amended. And it should be according to a minimum living standard, but it is actually below that. So at least to reach the minimum living standard. But we're always talking about rights. That's right.
Yeah, and it's like also very important. Like every time that I think of the Icelandic human rights movement, I think about this term of all rights for all people.
Yeah.
So basically, not focusing on one right and not focusing on one specific group. Let's say it's like all rights for all people, basically.
Yeah. And this is why we have this those 15 affiliates working on various rights, but still we respect the rights of everyone.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Your right, of course, ends where the rights of the next person begins.
Exactly.
This is also important to think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because we are now almost at our 1 hour time frame that we set for today. I wanted to discuss a little bit with you about how would you see partnerships with Romanian organizations, because you have been in contact with our context, and we have been talking about also for the previous fund about interests of Romanian civil society for sure. But what do you think, like sustainable partnership would undertake in order, to build together things or to add value to each other?
Yeah. Well, in the last cycle, there were actually a few projects with Romanian or Icelandic and Romanian partnerships, and they were really successful, all that I know of.
Yes.
And what I have seen actually as being really, I would say, useful for not only NGOs from Romania, but from the other beneficiary countries, is to visit Iceland, visit the organizations they are interested in, and also municipal bodies and so on, which are carrying out tasks that maybe those organizations are involved with in their home country. But seeing now, of course, that COVID is stopping that at the moment, at least.
Yeah.
So it isn't really a possibility, and we don't know exactly when that will happen.
Yeah.
We were actually discussing in a meeting, I think yesterday or the day before, with the FMO, alternative ways of cooperating. So that would be a very, I think actually that to work on reports on mapping the situation in each country and how various issues are dealt with, how they are solved or and how basically the organizations are trying to have them resolved. What kind of methods do they use? How do they lobby for various interests? How do they monitor the government? And I think actually that there can be endless possibilities of cooperation. And one, which of course, like I was saying, it's useful to come here and visit and see how things work here. It is also very useful for Icelandic partners to come to Romania and see how you are doing things.
Yes.
And just also to see I think it's so important that you see how things are dealt with in this country and you see how things are dealt with here, just to compare, because often something is being done in the other country that would be very useful to do here and vice versa. So to learn from each other's experience. And I have also, well, at least it's my take or my belief that when organizations are working for the same goal and the same rights actually, and trying to better the situation of any group basically, then it doesn't really matter from which country you're coming. You all speak the same language.
Yeah.
So it's of very good use to you to basically be able to reflect yourself in the other organization to get a and also always there is this common understanding, but then you're dealing with you're dealing with different types of society, and you're dealing with different governments and so on, and well, different beliefs often, or and definitely a different financial situation and so on. But putting your heads together and broadening basically the scope is always a very helpful thing.
I was just marking some things because, like in like from the discussion that we had, but also our other conversations, for sure for Romanian organizations, it would be very valuable to understand the context and to see how they can, have good practices and methodologies and activities related to human rights issues and protection of rights, and how they can implement it. And we have the example of Stigamot working with the Romanian organization that created that, for sure. We can also see the relation that you have with the public authority and how we can actually, monitor that and then implement that in order, even though they finance us, we can still, take them to make them accountable, basically, for the things. And also, of course, I think it's also a very interesting good practice related to membership based. So how actually, organizations can gather more members or more followers into for their work. Also, I think it's a very interesting side that NGOs related in relation to environment and climate change are also, I think they could also make something in partnership together, because like in Iceland, for sure, there is a tradition in this area, especially for environment, and especially with the public authority and the environment.
Definitely.
Would you say there is something else as a topic or as a area in which we could do this learning from each other, or sharing of experiences from Icelandic point of view? Of course, I'm asking.
Well, not really. I would say just that all organizations here, regardless of what they are working for, whether it be the environment or participation in society or the rights of young people or old people or whatever, but they are usually very knowledgeable on the on the issues that they are dealing with or promoting. So they actually have, and they understand actually the role of NGOs in a democratic society. So I would think that in all respects that you could always get knowledgeable partners from Iceland, which but I can't think. That's all I can think of at the moment.
It's fine. Margaret, thank you very much for this conversation. I think it's valuable for many organizations, again, to understand just a little bit, to get a little bit excited about Norway and Iceland context, so that they get motivated to go further into the topic, because this is just 1 hour conversation. We are not covering everything, but I think that we can give some clues on this context, which are quite different from ours, but I think we can learn from each other a lot. And I'm just making a public invitation. I think anyone who is interested in Icelandic, in working with Icelandic organizations, can also contact you. Can contact the Icelandic Human Rights Center. It's humanrights.is, the website.
And humanrights.is, and my email is Margrét. It's MARGRET @humanrights.is.
Yeah, and for sure, you would be, entitled to to direct people from to one organizations or another. You obviously know the civil society context, and of course the organizations that are working.
Yeah. Definitely.
So thank you very much for today, and hopefully we have a lot of good projects with Icelandic organizations for the Active Citizens Fund in this period.
I hope so too. I really hope so. I think it will benefit both parties to have a partnership. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye. Have a nice day, everyone.
Yeah, you too.